Hey everyone, this is Chad from Vintage Space, and today we're going to be building the Saturn 1 rocket in Kerbal Space Program 2. But before I begin, I'd like to thank you for all the new subscribers I've had over the week. And if you look behind me, I have another piece of foam designating that we have recently had a new subscriber. So let's begin here. I'm in the VAB right now, and I want to just kind of build and then talk about the Saturn 1 interchangeably. I don't want to focus too much on the building, but I also don't want to focus too much on blabbering. I just want to keep you guys entertained here while I can. I want to go ahead and start off with basically Saturn 1 has what's called the instrument control unit. The Kerbal Space Program equivalent to that is the remote guidance unit. So I have this RCL01 here. I'm going to go ahead and spawn that inside the vehicle assembly building as our starting point. Okay. If you look off to the side, I have a picture of what the Saturn 1 does look like. And the Saturn 1 was first flown in 1961. It was a two-stage rocket. I had two variants of the upper stage. The first stage was, of course, called the S1 stage. And the upper stage was either the S4 stage or the S5 stage. I'm going to add on to this control unit. What we need to do is we're just going to work our way down. And choose a fuel tank. The medium-sized fuel tank right here. Okay. Now we're going to widen the base a little bit by using a payload fairing. I'm just going to set this off to the side. We're going to need to put a second stage engine. So as I was talking about the stages here, we have the S4 second stage, which had 6 RL-10 engines powered by liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. However, sometimes they did fly what's called the S5 upper stage, and that used 2 RL-10 engines, and that actually flew 4 times in the entire Saturn 1 program. Also, I do need to point out, don't get the Saturn 1 confused with the more famous Saturn 1B that did carry actual crew around the moon. Alright, so let's stick an engine on here. They don't have the exact engines, obviously, in the game for what's supposed to be an RL-10 engine, so I'm just going to go ahead and use something kind of close. I'm going to choose the LVT-45 swivel. We'll place that on the bottom just like that. Now here's where I want to stick a decoupler on the bottom. Medium size. Now you'll notice that the shroud here is not the same size on the top. So we can fix that by creating a payload fairing, but which will kind of not act like a fairing, but more of like an interstage fairing. If you look in the picture here, you can notice that there's this little tiny section where it, after the first stage, it thins out a little bit, and that goes into the second stage. I'm going to try to simulate that here in Kerbal Space Program 2, and with all the bugs, that might not go so well. Okay, so let's see what we can do here. You know what I'm actually going to do? I'm going to step up the size of that fairing. We're going to use the large. We've been doing medium parts so far. Let's see if we can't make this look a little bit better. Alright, and then this green check mark completes it. The X just reverts it back to default. Uh-oh. Cannot accept current changes. Fairing is colliding with an invalid assembly part. Oh, wow. Alright. Let's just kind of tweak this around and Oops. Well, looks like that's gonna work. Alright, we're back. If I sound a little tired, it is almost 3 in the morning. I've had a very long day. So with that said, let's go ahead and continue building this first stage. We're going to choose the fuel tanks for it. In the fuel tank menu, we want to choose this large S3 14400 fuel tank. Now to simulate the size of the Saturn 1, we're going to want to put 2 of these. Now you can duplicate this part by holding Alt and then left clicking, and that will duplicate that part for you. Alright, this rocket is definitely coming together now. Let's go ahead and simulate the first stage engines. Now the first stage is powered by 8 H1 engines. And these engines were developed by Rocketdyne specifically for the construction of the Saturn 1 rocket. And for that engine, I'm going to just use this REM3 mainsail as the engine. Now, I also want to combine stages where needed. We want to drag the decoupler with the little interstage fairing we made. This new version, they patched the game last week. They did fix the staging problem where you couldn't move the stages around very well. So I'm happy they got that fixed. Nice sip of coffee should get me going here. All I got left is the top of the rocket, which is the nose cone. I want to kind of explain what's going on there. Usually the Saturn 1 lifted off either a water ballast to simulate the mass that it's taking to orbit, or there was a boilerplate Apollo capsule, which of course means just a pretend capsule, but it is to simulate the mass to make sure that the rocket can indeed launch with such payload. Alright, we're going to head over to the payload section and go grab a medium-sized payload fairing. Place that on the top, and this is where things get a little bit tricky. We're going to be building this fairing in multiple stages, and I'm going to teach you how to do that if you don't know how to do that. We're going to start off dragging the green arrow up, and if you look at the picture of the Saturn 1 again, we want to simulate the shape that it's trying to make, because it just keeps stepping up. So we're going to drag, and we'll stop about right there. And then this plus sign indicates we can create a step. So that step's been created, and now we can drag it up more. And then create that little neck part. We'll create another step. And we'll come back up. A little bit too long there. And create a step. And we're going to do the nose cone. And then drag the red arrow in like this. Okay, we're completed. And remember that green check mark I was talking about earlier? Go ahead and click that, and that will close that off. And there we have it, a Saturn 1 rocket built in Kerbal Space Program 2. Alright, we're going to take this rocket out on the launch pad. While we're waiting for this scene to load up, I do want to point out a really interesting feature about the second stage of the Saturn 1 rocket. If it's using the S5 upper stage, the 2RL10 engines, that gave birth to the Centaur upper stage that is actually still flown today. Alright, let's get this rocket off the pad. Of course, we hope it flies, because I have not checked my staging. But that's what I love about Kerbal Space Program. If things go wrong, explosions happen, and then we could just learn from our mistakes and rebuild the rocket. And yes, and just as I said, mistakes were made. Well, I'm going to go ahead and cut the engine off here. Okay. Don't cut off. Well. Oh! Look at that. My first mishap. I'm going to go ahead and just load to the Kerbal Space Program Center, and I just wanted to talk about a few more things that need to be covered about this rocket. The manufacturers involved in the construction of the Saturn I were Chrysler, Douglas, and Convair. And this rocket was launched from Launch Complex 37 and Launch Complex 34. If you would like to know more about the Saturn I launch vehicle, stay tuned for a more in-depth episode this week in my new Vintage Space series. Alright, that'll do it for this video. See you on the launch pad.